Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Alice, one of our wonderful volunteers, who will now introduce our presenter today. Thank you, Alice.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'm very delighted to be introducing the workshop for today, which is Recovery for the Soul, Translating Ancient Wisdom into Emotional Sobriety with Dr. Samantha Dugan. What if the inner resources you need for lasting emotional sobriety have been with us all along, embedded in the ancient language of spiritual tradition? In this transformative workshop, behavioural psychologist and long-term recovery member Samantha Dugan will explore the traditional 7 gifts of the spirit: wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and awe, revealing how these timeless spiritual concepts can be understood as powerful tools for emotional sobriety. By translating the language of faith into the vocabulary of emotional recovery, Samantha demonstrates that these spiritual gifts are not relics of the past, but living inner capacities we can cultivate today. Participants will discover practical ways to access these ancient resources as active tools for maintaining emotional balance and supporting their recovery journey. So about Samantha Dugan, she's a behavioural psychologist, writer, and woman in long-term 12-step recovery. Her work brings together the insight of science and the wisdom of faith to support emotional clarity, parenting calm, and the deeper work of inner transformation. Samantha's new book, Channels of Peace, is available on Amazon, and I'll hand it over to Samantha. Very much looking forward to hearing your presentation today. Thank you.
And there we go, audio on. Thank you, Alice. That sounded really long. Next time I must send you something shorter. Yeah, so you've already introduced me, and I want to say thank you for having me back. I know some of you might have heard me speak before and already know me a bit, and some of you maybe are coming for the first time, so I just want to say hello. And really, this talk, I'm doing this because I'm a person in recovery. I'm a person in long-term recovery. For me, what that means is I haven't had an alcoholic drink or any other mind-altering substance for 17 years and counting, one day at a time. And I have also done lots of other work in different 12-step fellowships. And the idea for this talk, I really heard in the set aside prayer there, which is it's such a beautiful prayer. And I really heard, Tara, you read it so beautifully. And I really heard that expression. I wrote it down here: make way for new ways of knowing. And I jotted it down because I think this is what this talk is about. It grew out of an idea when myself and Alan Berger were speaking about what we might co-present at Recovery Reimagined in Trinity this year. And Recovery Capital is a bit of a buzz expression at the minute. And Alan suggested that, and I said, sure, let's go with it. But the language of Recovery Capital doesn't really speak to me. I don't tend to use that language a lot in my own personal recovery or in my professional work too much. And so, I've developed this niche as a little bit of a translator. And we all have got to translate. We've all got to translate into the language that works for us, that really speaks to us. But after Trinity, where I kind of introed part of this talk, I was thinking about it even more in preparation for today. And that's why I call tonight's talk Recovery for the Soul, because I realized that it's this ancient language that really speaks to my soul, something really deep inside me, because recovery, I thought at first it was just about learning how to not drink. And that was really important, that physical level sobriety, what you might call behavioral sobriety even. And then, of course, I learned that there's a deeper level. There's emotional sobriety, right? It's not just about putting down whatever it is that I'm really addicted to. It's also about getting that emotional balance. And thinking about the talk with Alan and this one now, I realized I'm inclined to think that there's a deeper level again. There's that really grounded base level, who I am, soul level. So that's why I called it Recovery for the Soul, because that's kind of what this language speaks to me of. And I was riffing on Chicken Soup for the Soul. I don't know if anybody knows that book, but I've started to think of it actually as not just recovery for the soul, but recovery of the soul. This language that I'm going to introduce tonight and translate again, it's over 2,500 years old. It's 2007 years old that these gifts. Let me go on to the next slide then. Yeah, so these, I'm calling them soul recovery tools. Yeah, we're going to look at the traditional gifts of the spirit, and there are 7 of those, as Alice called them out in the intro, but I'm going to put up all of them, all 7 of them. We're going to go quickly through some of them, and then I'm going to dive deeper into 4 of them. I've got 4 stories I really want to tell. And I'm going to be speaking about how each of these 7 maps onto emotional sobriety and giving you other words that might make you realize that actually you know this one already. You're using this one already. And the stories, I'm going to be talking about how these really show up in real life. And, for me, I find the rooms of recovery are endlessly giving because I relate to the stories that I hear. That's how I first identified in the rooms. And that's why I keep coming back. I think our souls respond to story. So I'll be showing how they show up in real life by using my own examples from my own real life. So that's what we're going to be doing today, speaking to the deepest needs of our heart, speaking to our souls. So here they are, the gifts of the Spirit: wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety and awe. There's an piety and wonder and awe. There's an even older expression for wonder and awe. Some of you may have heard of fear of the Lord. And that expression, fear of the Lord, you don't find it very often now because it's so misunderstood. It connotes an idea of quaking or trembling in front of a vengeful God, but that's not what it is at all. And, it was in recovery that I learned that we are not servile or scraping. We don't bow and scrape. Though sometimes I might bow in reverence, and we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that later. So there they are in their classical language. And I'm going to, as we go through it, I'll speak a little bit about this classical language. So the first one is wisdom. And I don't know if anybody recognizes this. So I'm a big believer that we can learn visually, we can learn through our words. So my slides always try to back up whatever it is I'm speaking about for people who can access learning better through visuals. That is the entrance to Newgrange, which is a site in Ireland, which it's absolutely spectacular. Maybe people can pop into the chat box if they've ever been there. I can still remember my hair standing on end when I went into Newgrange, and I've never been inside it on the solstice days, which are the point where the sun aligns and it shoots through. But wisdom means discernment, the spiritual perspective, seeing beyond our self-interest. So I've put up seeing beyond our self-interest there. And this ancient gift, it helps us to understand the things of God and to see the world from God's point of view. And I think the classical understanding also helps us to direct our life towards God. And if I think about it in my life, I wasn't directing my life towards God at all pre-recovery. I didn't have that wisdom. I didn't even know God was real. I didn't believe God was real. So I was thinking as well of other recovery language, the moment of clarity, or how we learn that serving others gets us out of self. So I think that's some of the ways in which we've already translated this ancient wisdom into recovery language. So that's the first of them. Now, the next one is understanding. And I want to spend a little time breaking this one down as well. So understanding can be better understood for us moderns, perhaps as insight or self-compassion or empathy. So empathy is a huge part of my professional work. Classically, what understanding means is this is the gift of the Spirit that helps us know the mysteries of faith. And one of the biggest mysteries of faith is that we are loved. And I think we find that in step 3, in steps 2 and 3, really. So in 2 and 3, came to believe in this power greater than ourselves and turning our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. Before I understood that one of the great mysteries of faith, that I was loved by a power greater than myself, I think I came to that through step 3, which was the first hint that there was something there, something greater than me that cared about me. And I think we all grow in that understanding. I'm sure we do. I hear it all the time in the rooms that people, when they first come in, they run away from the God word. They recoil from it. They're not comfortable with it. And then over time, the insight grows. The self-compassion can grow. And in fact, let me tell a little story here. I've got my reminder. So my understanding of this, I think my first hint of it occurred when my first child was born. So I had a boy, and caring for him, I was aware of this profound need in me to do well by him. The love for my child was so deep. And I think I understood, the way I might put it tonight is, having him was a corrective to my faulty idea that I wasn't lovable. When I saw him in his innocence and the simple instinct of a child, he cried when he needed food or warmth, and I understood his innocence, and I understood that he was lovable. And I think that initially pushed me into being more harsh on my parents, actually, because I through my childhood, I hadn't been particularly well listened to. It wasn't uncommon in Ireland in those days that children should be seen and not heard. But I think having him, I started to get more compassionate for myself. And later in recovery, as I practiced being gentle with myself, I started to notice that I was still sometimes very harsh on myself, still sometimes very harsh on others. My understanding that we are lovable wasn't fully in place yet. And whenever I got cross and I subjected that feeling that had come up to a step 10 inventory, I started to notice that fear was always at the bottom of it. I was frightened of judgment of others. I was frightened of failure. I was really afraid to make mistakes. I was really afraid to do things wrong. I was really afraid of not being loved, not being lovable, not being able to love, all of these fears. But as I uncovered those and subjected them to step 6 and 7, and I prayed for God to remove that harshness on myself, because I was in agony living with that level of harshness towards myself. I mean, I was just bleeding out internally. It was just so painful. And I was highly motivated to be rid of that. So I prayed that prayer often. Please, could I become more gentle? And I did. I gradually became more gentle and compassionate towards myself. I started to really understand that mystery of faith, that I am beloved. But what was really interesting was that I couldn't become selectively gentle. And I think here of Brené Brown's great insight that we can't selectively numb. When we numb ourselves with, muffins, if that's our thing, as she says in her famous talk, or alcohol or shopping or gambling or whatever our thing is, long distance running, whatever we're into, we cannot selectively numb. We end up numbing all of the feelings. And I think I learned that I couldn't become selectively gentle. The beautiful gift of becoming gentle with myself was that I started to become gentle with others as well. And I couldn't selectively forgive either. I mean, I'm speaking now from a point of where this is in the past. So don't get me wrong. It happened in stages. It didn't happen all at once and overnight. There were points where I could be gentle with this person and that person and the other person, but not that one. But gradually it grew. And it was the same with forgiveness. I forgave here and there and that person and this situation and that thing. And I discovered you can't selectively forgive. So this is understanding, or empathy maybe in modern language. This was what allowed me to see the wound that people carried and not the weapon that they wielded. So this is the next one I want to cover. This one classically is called Counsel. And other ways of describing it could be inner guidance or intuition or sound decision making. All of these perhaps speak to you better than the old language. I quite like inner guidance. I think that's really nice. And it speaks to me of pages 84 to 88 in the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous, where it says that, we've just got started and we're getting used to relying on that intuition. We're not always inspired, but we work on it and we cultivate that inner guidance and we become better at discerning right and wrong. And I know some people don't like the language of right and wrong, and that's okay. I'm okay with the language of right and wrong, but some people prefer the language of, harmful to self or others, or beneficial for self and others. Classically, this is the gift that allows you to choose the path of God, or what we in recovery might call doing the next right thing. Yeah. Or first things first, maybe, is another way that we access this kind of wisdom. And I thought as well, I'd tell a story here about how this shows up in my life, or how it showed up in my early recovery as well. So I go to a Just for Today meeting every week because it's really helpful for me to hear the Just for Today card on a regular basis. And there's a line on there, if anybody is familiar with it: just for today, I will save myself from two pests, hurry and indecision. Now, I am not hurry. I am indecision. I know indecision really, really well. I weigh things up. I consider. I delay. I procrastinate. I avoid. I take too long. I let the perfect get in the way of the good. So, for example, one of the ways this showed up in my real life is that if my children had two invitations, or if our family had two invitations, I would get in a tangle about which one to accept, which was a closer friend, or which was more appropriate for our calendars, or which one might we enjoy more. And so I'd get in these tangle trying to wake everything up. And then one day I heard a mom in the playground. She wasn't in recovery, by the way. I want to say that. I'm not so into the muggle and we folk in recovery divide, because I've learned so much from people who are not in recovery. Anyway, this little girl came bounding up to her mom and she said, "Mom, can I go to so-and-so's party on such and such a day?" And the mom just went, "No, we have something already on that day." Boom. In that moment, I understood that it wasn't so difficult to make those decisions, that you honored the first commitment. And my life got really much simpler after that. And you might say, how did she not know that? I know that. But I didn't know that. I had probably been taught that by my parents, but I had forgotten. And my indecision got me tangled in those kinds of things that should have been simpler. Or here's another one where discernment evaded me. And that was particularly in how I should act around children. Because, of course, in recovery, we learn we're powerless over people, places, and things, right? And we don't try to control other people. But it's a bit different when you're talking about adults and children, right? So one day I was with some adults and we were walking children on what's called over here a walking bus. So, we're some adults accompanying a big bunch, a class of children. And I was behind two dawdling little girls, and I kept adjusting myself. I was sort of right up behind them, and I wish they were going faster. But I was, I was adjusting myself to what is. And then my friend, fellow mom, also not in recovery, she said to the girls, and quite sharply, "Girls, stop dawdling, move faster." And they did. I couldn't believe it. And again, boom, burned itself into my memory. And I realized I've been tangling myself up in knots. I can let that go. I don't have to get in a tangle about saying to children, hurry up. I can just do that. And I'm going to tell one final story. This is about when you ignore your inner guidance, this one. There was a woman, again, a school mom, not in recovery, and we became friends, though I think I had early signals and some early discomfort, but I needed a friend. This was the first years in school, and I'm in a new country. I'm living in a country where I haven't grown up and where I'm not from, so I needed to make friends. And this lady, she made some subtle digs at me, and I ignored them, but it ended up coming to a really painful end. And I suppose what I learned from that, yeah, I didn't trust my early intuition. I wanted a friend. I wanted her to like me. I paid for it in the fallout, it was agonizing and acutely painful. So what I learned from that and what I say now is if your soul says don't start it, you probably shouldn't. Because it's easier, it's kinder, it's way less messier to not get into something in the first place. That if you honor your counsel, your inner guidance at the start, you know already, and then you won't have to clean up the mess. So that's counsel. What have we got next? Oh, fortitude. I love fortitude. Other words for fortitude might be persistence, courage, courageous persistence towards emotional growth, resilience. So all of those terms are, modern terms for the old-fashioned word of fortitude. What is the classical understanding of fortitude? Fortitude strengthens our will. It helps us to put the wisdom where we now can see things a bit more from God's perspective. It allows us to put that wisdom into action so we can accomplish what it is that we want to accomplish. Fortitude is what allows us to enact our discernment, which is improving as we get into recovery. And I was thinking about this. I think the gift of willingness might be one of the ways in which we express this in recovery. Or we say to people, we try to encourage their fortitude by saying things like, keep coming back, and keep coming back no matter what. Now, this one is really hard, right? And I thought I'm going to go really current with this one. So I have I have a number of sponsees, and some of them I find need continual encouragement that just because it feels terrible today doesn't mean that there's anything wrong in your recovery. Shall I say that again? It's so important. Just because you feel terrible today doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong or that there is anything wrong in your recovery. I know that I hear all the time in the rooms that life is up and down. And I think we all know that, right? We all know that life is up and down, except when we're in the down. I think as soon as we're in the down, we tend to forget that. Or at least I know plenty of people who tend to forget that. And I did too. And slowly but gradually, I learned that actually I had to persist in this. And it takes great courage. It takes great courage to keep looking at your wounds, to feel the feelings that you've been pushing aside for years, maybe decades. You wouldn't have medicated them if they didn't hurt. It's because they hurt that we require persistence, we require fortitude. And my sponsor says to me, that, you know, your higher power has to activate. She uses the word activate. The thing that your higher power wants to remove from you, you'll have to see it. So it will have to be activated so that you can see it, so that you become willing to let go of it. Because if I don't know it, or if I'm in denial about it, or if I don't think there's anything wrong with it, well, then how can I be removed or relieved of it? So this is one of the things that I remind people in recovery most of, and I needed constant reminders myself for it. And in the end, one of the ways that I came to understand it is I walked away from the language of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I know that works for some people, but it didn't work for me because I was so down on when I took a step back. So for me, I understood that if I made my decision this morning to turn my will and my life over, and I was committed to recovery, and I intended to go to bed tonight without any of, you know, picking up any of my habits, well, then I was going forward. And even if it was painful, horrendously painful, and I was like snot crying on the floor, that was okay because I was still going forward. And my sponsor reminded me all the time, step 2, your higher power has not abandoned you. She said those words to me, I don't know how many hundreds of times. And I had such a smile, and a little smile. A few weeks ago, a sponsee said to somebody else, my sponsor says to me all the time, my higher power, your higher power has not abandoned you. Apparently, I passed that one on because I think it's absolutely beautiful. Your higher power has not abandoned you, no matter how awful it feels. Hold on to courageous persistence in the face of emotional growth, because emotional growth can be very painful. And to get totally current, the next frontier for me is that book that Patrick mentioned. So I've just published my first book. It took Fortitude to write it. It took Fortitude to publish it. And now, oh my goodness, I'm having to market it. The person I was 25 or 30 years ago thought marketing was a bad word. Now I have come to understand that marketing is just letting people know that you have something that they might want. And so I've become gentler in my approach to so many things, including marketing, but it's still hard. It's really hard to ask people for an endorsement for the pages in the inside, just inside the cover, or for on the cover, but I've done it. And I've had to put on what I call my big girl pants. And I was speaking to my sponsor this week about this and other things. And she ended up telling me, I mean, she's been my sponsor for about 15 years, I think, but she's never told me before about her Snoopy pants. And I need to be careful here because it's pants. But apparently she had a pair of Snoopy and Peanuts pants, and they were a shade of green that she absolutely loved. And when she had them on, she felt stronger. And she knew it was the placebo effect, she said, but nevertheless, they helped. And up until this point in time, this week, my big girl pants, which, you know, I metaphorically use whenever needed, have always been metaphorical. And this week I realized that actually I'm going to have to go and get myself my version of my Snoopy pants. So that's what Fortitude is about. It's about having the courage to keep showing up in your life, in your meetings. It's about trying something new that you've never done before, even though you're scared. It's about risking being seen. And yeah, sometimes you might need your backup pants to help you with it. So that's Fortitude. Knowledge. How am I doing for time? I'm okay. Right. Alternative words for knowledge. So, well, let's talk about the classical understanding of knowledge first. Knowledge is what helps us to discover God's will in all things. So I like the expression spiritual clarity, for example. Instead of knowledge, you might like that idea, spiritual clarity. It's the ability to discern what is God's will for you. What is God's will? And one thing, for instance, I have complete spiritual clarity about nowadays is that if you find yourself in a recovery meeting in the rooms, wondering whether you might need a 12-step fellowship for substance use or abuse, and you think you might have that problem and be an alcoholic, well, then it most definitely is God's will for you that you not have a drink. That's the way I see it these days. For me, it's very simple. I don't know God's will for me always, but I certainly know that it's God's will for me that I stay sober today. And I think that there's a certain humility in being able to figure out God's will for you. So I like that word humility as an alternative for that as well. And one of the ways I thought about this is in my early years of recovery, I mean, I was practicing humility. I was trying to be humble. I so had none when I got into recovery. But even for my first years in recovery, when I was trying to figure out God's will for me, I wouldn't have all the options on the table. Right? Does that make sense? You know, I would go, well, I definitely won't do that. And I certainly don't want to do that. And as I stayed in recovery and I kept practicing all of this stuff, I began to realize that actually, what if the thing that I've ruled out is God's will for me? And so I suppose it was kind of an act of humility. And I use the language of putting all options on the table. For me, that's become one of the most practical, down-to-earth, grounded tools that I have when I'm trying to make a decision that is in any way not immediately obvious. I have to make sure to put all the options on the table. Otherwise, I can never have any clarity about it. And I think that moment of clarity, you know, I had that early on when you suddenly realize, oh, yeah, I need these rooms. This is my problem. And that appears to be the solution. So I think clarity is a helpful way of understanding it. Self-awareness can be another way of understanding it, but also curiosity, maybe. Maybe you like the idea of being extra curious, and that, you know, the way I think of that is that why don't I be curious about what might be God's will for me in this moment, in this season, in this instance? Because if I adopt that attitude of curiosity, then I might discover that it's not what I thought. And of course, this speaks to that, you know, early Alcoholics Anonymous language of, you know, I used to be the director and write the show and direct everything about it, and now I have ceased being the director. There's somebody else in charge. Next one is piety. And I thought this was a beautiful image. I don't know if anybody's ever prayed in this position. I found myself praying in this position one night, quite accidentally, actually. I'd just discovered that my son was being picked on a bit in school by a few boys. He'd, can I tell this story? In a science lesson, a teacher had walked up behind him, and to demonstrate what they were learning in science, he had made a big loud boo noise behind my son, and my son jumped out of his skin. And because he's a particularly sensitive kind of person, a tear rolled down his face, and that led to some teasing by some boys afterwards. And when I found out this was going on, I was in great turmoil. And that night I couldn't sleep, and I got up and went into a spare room and started to pray for help. And I found myself in this position. I found myself in this position on the floor asking for help. And I think it's actually, for me, you know, I don't pray like that often, but obviously some people pray like that daily, multiple times a day. Reverence is a good word for this as well. And I think approaching step 11, sometimes I've spoken in these meetings before about how I've danced my step 11, and I've shared that my sponsor knits her step 11. But sometimes I approach my higher power like this with great reverence. And I think this kind of attitude towards our higher power helps us learn to love both our higher power and our recovery. And I was thinking that so often we hear that we maybe hear expressions like came for the drinking and stayed for the thinking. And there's no doubt emotional sobriety is about the phase when we're addressing that thinking. And if we keep practicing step 11, then I think we come to love recovery, even though first we may do it out of duty. Eventually, if we adopt a posture of reverence towards step 11, then we will come to love our higher power, love recovery. And one of the great gifts of doing step 11 is you start to really understand how much you are loved and how lovable you are, to circle right back to the gift of understanding that we've touched on already. So that's piety or reverence. And this is the last gift. This one is wonder and awe. And I don't know if anybody's ever read George Vailant's work. He was a non-alcoholic trustee of Alcoholics Anonymous for a time, and he's also a psychologist and neuroscientist at the University of Harvard, I believe. Anyway, George Vaillant has this wonderful book, and he talks about the spiritual feelings being hardwired in us. And actually, he's not a believer or a person of faith at all. I'm not remembering the name of his book right this second. I ought to have looked that up before I came in, but maybe somebody can look that up. George Vaillant, Vaillant is his name. And wonder and awe is hardwired into us. That is our response innately, naturally, when we recognize the grandeur of God. And that's why I chose this image, because, this is a very young human person. And I think we all recognize that absolute delighted wonder expression. We get that feeling. I think an awful lot of people talk about having nature as a higher power, and that makes total sense to me, because this wonder and awe is the feeling that we get when we're in front of, the Milky Way on a dark night and we can see it, or when we've climbed up a Munro in Scotland, or, I've never climbed really high mountains, but when you get even to the top of some of the small hills that are around me in Surrey here, it's just magnificent. It's wonder and awe when I look down. The ocean is another place, because the ocean is so vast and so powerful and so enormous. And frankly, for me, a little bit dangerous. I'm definitely not a massive seafarer, but that's what God is. And this is our natural reaction. And a lot of people talk about that sense of being small in the face of the divine. And I think this is what this gift gives us. It right sizes ourself. It makes us realize that there's a lot more to life than we can really realize, that we are not the center of it all, not in a bad way, but in a way that can actually, the way I think of it is that it's in a way that can help us surrender. So there's something far more powerful than me out there, and it's tangible in moments. And that power is in charge, not me. And when I learn to trust that power and lean into and practice believing that it's real and it is in charge, well, the immensity of it, I found, made it possible for me to trust it more and to hand more and more and more over to it. So there was a year, in fact, I think it seems relevant here. There was a year when believe was my word for the whole year. I just meditated on that word, believe. Can I believe this? Because of course, I've shared already, at the start of my journey, I didn't believe this. I didn't believe it. And because I didn't believe it, I wasn't held by anything. And I was at the mercy of that kind of meaningless that can accompany a life that doesn't see that it's held or doesn't see meaning anywhere. So I wrote believe down and I put it up, and I indeed came to believe. And I want to tell another story, another incredibly current story from, what is it? It's Monday, so it was last week. The gift of right sizing and surrender. So last week, I had to say what I think was true, but was definitely hard truth to somebody. And later I wondered, did I get that wrong? Should I not have said it? Was it too much? In case you're wondering, it didn't land tremendously well, if I put it like that. The person did not like what I had said. So it happened in the evening, and the following morning I found time to ring my sponsor. And I had subjected it to step 10 already myself. And I had done what I call a take a bow amends. As best as I could tell, I hadn't done anything wrong and that I had been gentle. But what I've discovered is that I don't like to say the amends that goes, I'm sorry if. For me, that language doesn't work. I don't like when I get, I'm sorry if amends to me. In fact, my sponsor and I, we jokingly call them AMs rather than amends. So it's like less than half an amends. It's an AM. So I had made a take a bow amends. For me, a take a bow amends is when I am sorry this person is upset, but I don't believe I've done anything wrong, and therefore I can't say sorry for what I did or said. So that's another little tool that I've found useful. So I rang my sponsor, ran it past her, told her what happened, explained it all. And she said, I don't think so either. I think her word was generous. I think you've been generous. But she said she left me with the instruction, the suggestion, of course, to go and pray a step 11 prayer that went, God, if I need to make amends, show me. If I've done wrong, show me. And then I trotted off on the rest of my day, and I went to Mass that day. And everything in the service in the church that day whispered back to me, no, you did the right thing. I was gentle. You were gentle. You were generous. All is well. All is well resonated in my soul. And I felt peace, great peace with that. And as if that wasn't enough, and I felt awe. I felt awe at the idea that my higher power can hear my prayer and answer me like that, can order the whole universe to give me an answer at the next place I'm going to immediately after praying that prayer. So 2 days later, I walked into a fellowship meeting and I found myself seated next to, I sat on a seat, took a seat. I could see that there was a bottle and a bag on the seat next to me, but I didn't know who was sitting in it. When the meeting got going, the person came in and sat in this seat, and I could hardly believe it. It was a person about whom I had prayed the prayer about 6 weeks prior. I had prayed the prayer, if it is right for me to speak to that person, make it obvious, make it clear, put them next to me, show me that it would be the right thing to do to speak to that person and to ask them that question. So put them in my path if it's right. And then voila, 6 weeks later, there they are. I had completely forgotten about it. I had absolutely forgotten about that prayer and that request and that desire to speak to the person until, of course, they were right beside me. And from that, I think the lesson for me was the right sizing of the self, the awe, once again, that my prayer is heard, that my prayer is answered, not in my timing. I can be a bit now or never. Should I do it now? And if I don't do it now, well then, oh, never, like, forget about it. I'm you know, I'd rather not do the hard things. See previous story about big girl pants. Yeah. But if I surrender, if I pray the prayer and I let go of the outcome, and I even let go of thinking about it, and I am willing to surrender to God's timing, which is often so much better, not often, always so much better than my timing, because it will be when the time is right. And I got to ask my question. I got to ask my question, and the answer was really helpful. And once again, it went right into my soul, and it helped me feel greater peace. And I felt in awe. Of course, needless to say, I rang my sponsor later and told her both those stories. I told her both those stories, and we both experienced wonder and awe that this is how recovery works. I realized that I am not in charge. I am heard, I am held, I am guided, and that is why I keep coming back. For the wisdom of all my fellows in the rooms who have taught me all this stuff. This is not my stuff. They might be my stories, but you know, this stuff is ancient. This is ancient. As I said, these words are 2,500 years old. And I like to use the old words, the new words. I find that the old words really speak to my soul. So they're the old ones again, but let me translate them here. I think becoming more conscious of these things is how we recover the soul, because life isn't meant to just be about surviving. It's about becoming whole. I've come to believe that God wants us to thrive, to integrate our bodies, minds, and spirits. We speak in recovery of this being a threefold illness. And I think it's a threefold recovery. First, we get well in our bodies. We put down whatever substance we might be using. Emotional sobriety. We've tackled the mind. We've, you know, got to learn how to maintain our emotional peace in all sorts of situations where we used to lose it. And it happens gradually. You know, we tackle the way we think, we reframe our thoughts, we examine the beliefs that we picked up in childhood that cause us great pain, and we feel the pain. And when it's felt, it diminishes. And then, of course, there's our spirit or our soul. And these are, I put to you, I'd love to hear, we're coming to Q&A now, so I'd love to hear what you think of this, or what questions you might have that have occurred to you as you've listened. And I'm going to leave us. Oh, yes, I said I'd have a little mention. The idea, again, the classical idea is that those inner gifts start to bear external fruit, and the fruits of the Spirit, that's them there. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. So that's the result of cultivating the inner resources that are the gifts of the Spirit. And then I thought I'd finish by throwing out these two questions to get you to think about. Which gift feels most active in your life now? Just have a little think. As I was sharing last week, it was all about wonder and awe for me. And then this question. Which gift could you use more of? Which one would you like to cultivate? Which one maybe feels missing? If you responded to any of them, follow your soul and recover it. Oh yeah, the book, plug for the book. If you've read the book, please maybe leave a review, or what are they called? Yeah, those reviews on Amazon. That would be really helpful if you liked it. And if you haven't read it, then there it is. There's the result of my big girl pants questions of asking some people for some endorsements. So That's not me saying that about myself. It would be far too cringeworthy to be saying that about myself, but it's very nice that other people said that about it. So thank you all very much for listening.
Okay, so we've hit the top of the hour. I don't want to impose on your time, Samantha. And thank you so much for doing this and for doing so many of these great workshops for us. And that was just great.
Thank you for inviting me. And as we've just gone through the hour and I have another commitment now. So with great love to everybody, I will say my goodbyes. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you want to take us out with a prayer of your choice?
Yeah, Serenity Prayer.
Serenity Prayer, and everybody can unmute if you wish.
Yeah, I'm going to say the long version because it's got some lines in it that I absolutely adore. So it goes, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Grant me patience with the changes that take time, appreciation of all that I have, tolerance of those with different struggles, and the strength to get up and try again, one day at a time.
Wonderful.